and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about conducting literature reviews and how to move from problems, research problems, to sources. We are continuing to study the old-time classic written by Booth, Kalam, and Williams, The Craft of Research, published by the University of Chicago Press, and this video is focused on chapter 5 in this book. So we will talk, about several things today. We will begin with quickly defining 3 kinds of sources that you can use in your research. We will talk about how to screen sources for reliability. Then we will discuss how you could locate printed and recorded sources, and move on to discussing how you can find sources on the internet. We will talk about gathering data directly from people and what to do, how to find bibliographical trails, and what to do with what you find. So let's begin. So there are 3 kinds of sources that that people typically use in research. The first kind is primary sources. This is your actual raw data, materials you directly write about, and sometimes you use them in your literature reviews as well. But mostly you use them for actual, empirical research, right? But yeah, it happens that we use them in literature reviews, although very rarely, especially at the undergraduate level, that happens quite rarely. Mostly what you're going to use in your literature reviews are secondary sources. These are research reports in the form of maybe books or articles, and in the form of actual reports, and these are based on primary data. Okay, so they analyze the data that they collected or somebody else collected for them, and then they write about that data. They analyze that and write up empirical results. Okay, there are also tertiary sources. This is the third kind of sources, and those logically, you can guess, are books and articles based on secondary sources. Okay, so they usually repeat, they kind of restate, summarize what others have researched and found, okay? And they might be useful in very early stages of research, when you don't have any idea about what you're studying and maybe you want to get kind of a picture of what's going on in this topic. And, maybe Wikipedia could be an example of a tertiary source, right? And usually those sources tend to oversimplify things, right? Because when you are telling about what other people did, you have to summarize that. And when you summarize things, you have to really omit details, you have to omit caveats, things that are discussed in detail in secondary sources. Okay. Another risk of using tertiary sources is that they tend to be out of date. Research, especially in some fields like computer science and even education, moves on quite quickly, and there are new research articles and books published nearly every month, and so tertiary sources that summarize those things just do not always keep up, right? So when you use those tertiary sources, you're risking to be using dated information. And usually tertiary sources are mistrusted by experts for this very reasons, right? And so my personal advice would be maybe use a tertiary source like a Wikipedia, just to maybe get a glimpse into your field, into your topic, but really focus on secondary sources for your literature review. And maybe very rarely at the undergraduate level, you might consider using primary sources. But really, for a literature review, you have to use your secondary sources mostly, and you use primary sources for your empirical analysis. Okay. So once you start looking for sources and you start finding them, you really your goal is to find sources that are on topic and relevant to your hypothesis. Okay, these two components are absolutely necessary. If you find something that is on topic but irrelevant to your hypothesis, that source isn't really useful. If you find something on another topic but it's still relevant to your hypothesis, that is also not very useful. So really look for stuff that is on your topic and relevant to your hypothesis. Okay, once you found those things that seem to be on your topic and relevant to your hypothesis, then you have to screen those sources for reliability. Your job is to use only reliable sources for your literature review and really for your research in general. So how do you identify whether this source is reliable? If you are an advanced student of your field, then it is a bit easier because you know the literature, you know the what kind of sources you could trust. But chances are, if you are an undergraduate student or even a graduate student just beginning in your research in your field, then it's you cannot just identify reliable sources as easily. Thankfully, there are some tips that can guide you. So, the first thing you want to look at to identify a reliable source is whether it was published by a reputable press. Okay, so if you have no idea about the literature on your topic, then please, you have to focus on if a source is published, for example, by a university press, then you can quite likely trust that source. Okay, so an example of a university press is a Chicago University Press. Which published the book we are discussing in this videos, or Oxford University Press. I have no idea. Okay, university presses. Another tip is to check whether what you are reading has been peer reviewed and peer reviewed by independent experts. Okay, so peer reviewed literature, it tends to be of the highest possible quality available there. Another tip is to look at who the author is. Okay, in books in the back cover they kind of describe, they usually print an author's short bio, right? If many authors wrote different chapters in the book, then you can find those short bios somewhere in the beginning of the book, in the intro or something. In research articles, the journals tend to indicate where the authors work, their affiliation, and you can check them by Googling them. Um, well, if an author is a reputable scholar in your field, then it is likely that the source is reliable. Another tip is to check if the source is current, okay? And the currency is really field specific. So in computer science, stuff that was published 2 months ago might become obsolete. So check, it depends on your discipline. And so in this case, a good idea might be to consult guides to research in your field, or sometimes those guides exist for specific topics. So check, and this idea of a source being up to date is really a bit relative, but it's still a useful indicator for a reliable source. Okay, so how can you locate printed and recorded sources? Okay, you found, so you found a lot of stuff, but you want to actually now read them, right? So those could be the things that you're looking for could be books, articles, even photographs, films, maybe some sort of videos, etc., right? So the first advice really would be go to a library. um, your university library perhaps might be your first choice, and note that it is always super useful to start early, because if your university library or another library that you choose doesn't have a source you're looking for and that you've identified as relevant to your topic and your hypothesis, you have to start early so that maybe your library could loan actually the source from another library. This process is called interlibrary loans, and it takes time. In my experience, it could take anywhere up to 6 weeks. So if you are on a deadline, which you are likely are, then start early. Do not expect to find everything immediately in the library. Okay. So another tip is really go and talk to a librarian. Okay, don't if you are not like a if you don't know every square inch of your library, it's a good idea to ask questions to a librarian. Usually, university libraries have an assigned, specially assigned librarian for every school or department. So if you go to a library, you can actually ask, "Hey, I'm from school. For example, I'm from the School of Education. Could I talk to my school librarian?" Okay, and it's always a good idea to prepare to talk to your librarian, and it's a good idea to prepare like maybe 3 to 5 minutes elevator story in which goes something like, "I'm working on the topic of blah 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 so that I can find out blah 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 because I want my readers to understand better this and that." Okay, this is enormously helpful, and it's going to help your librarian help you efficiently. So do your prep work. Okay. Another advice when searching the library for printed and recorded sources is to begin with general reference works. Stuff like encyclopedias, handbooks, discipline-specific general references. Okay, those are typically available either in electronic or printed form. So it's always a good idea to begin with those. Next, you could go to specialized reference works, and those range from very specific, very specialized handbooks or some sort of I don't know, some sort of references. They could be published sometimes as annotated bibliographies. I know that I mean, I think University of Oxford has a series of annotated bibliographies, and your library might have access to them. Check them out. Uh, Another thing you will likely do when searching for sources in your library is really use research guides or library catalogs. Right? Those are these days mostly electronic. Yeah. So you have to do a good job using proper keywords. Make sure that those keywords are not too broad or not too narrow, and you could also my strong advice would be ask your librarian for advice on how to use keywords efficiently to search literature for your specific topic. Sometimes your school's assigned librarian could even recommend you better keywords, so you can say that this is your topic and this is what you're looking for, and what keywords do you think I could use is a question that you can really possibly ask your advisor. Okay, I mean librarian. You could actually also just walk around the library, just go through the stacks, and that is a little bit, you know, um, let's say it's called more like a wandering, but it sometimes leads to a very interesting discoveries. But if you're on a deadline, again, maybe it's not the best strategy. You are also likely to browse through databases to which your university library or the library you will work in has a subscription. So check things like JSTOR, I don't know, and many others, Web of Science, you know, and many other databases are a very useful resource to locate sources. All right. So the book, the Boscombe and Williams, they offer a short and sweet section on finding sources on the internet. I personally find that section is a bit dated, although it is very carefully written. It states that things are changing fast on the internet, and they are right. So at present, I think searching through the internet and searching through the library kind of merged, because most of the library search interfaces are web-based. So really, if you are just, I think the advice in the book refers really not to any search on the internet, but the search, just the way you do it, like the googling stuff, googling topics, right? If you're just googling and not doing an advanced search on the internet via your library or actual research databases, if you're just trying to google your topic and find some sources, then the book offers some useful advice, such as check on sources, really pay attention to sources provided by a reliable journal or a reliable online publisher. Okay. um, if you are just googling, if the source is in the same form as you find in a library, right, then it might be a reliable source. Also, sometimes you might just really Google stuff that is a supplement to a print source, right? So, for example, in economics, there are actual papers, research papers published in journals, but then those papers, they offer a link, a web link to sometimes a very long supplement, which is an important part of that printed paper, which was peer reviewed, and of course it's a very good quality. So if you are uh, looking at those kinds of supplements, then it's a good idea to go online and just find them and use them. Okay, might be useful that if a source is super recent, in the manner that it could not physically really reach any library yet. So, for example, some journals offer online first publications, right? They will be published in the print version of a journal maybe months later, maybe half a year later, right? So in those cases, you can still use those sources because you really cannot find them anywhere yet except online. Okay, that concerns pretty much all sources that are available only on the internet. And also sometimes if a source is primary, like a YouTube video, right? If you're using, I don't know, Twitter data, if you're scraping Twitter and to analyze it for your dissertation, then go ahead and go online, go on the internet and get the data. So something very rarely done, but might be a useful thing to know, is really sometimes you have to ask people for data, for sources, right? So if you plan to do that, again, a strong advice is to plan and prepare. Plan enough time because this is really time consuming, and prepare again, get ready with your elevator story about clearly explaining in really simple terms what you're working on, right? So I think as undergraduates and maybe graduate students, really you might talk to people if they are experts, and you might ask them for some literature, right? A lot here depends on what kind of questions you ask them. So you can talk to your professors, tell them what you're working on, and ask them if he or she knows some recent or interesting or useful or absolutely necessary, or like a seminal piece on what you're working on. This is a possibility, but again, don't get your hopes too high. If there is a good match and you have an expert like that around on the topic you're working on, then you're very lucky. If not, well, just go and do a library search, okay, or internet search. I think one thing that you will, as students do rarely is use people as primary sources of information. In some cases with research, maybe on topics that have very few published sources on, you can use people as primary sources. You could go to some industrial, government, or civic organizations to ask them um, how this or that thing happened. Maybe they even have some internal documents they could share with you and that you can use as your secondary sources or primary sources, right? So, for example, if you are studying how some processes that happened after the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, then in former Soviet countries, and you cannot find anything published on this topic, or government archives do not have anything, then you can go maybe to a local mayor's office and ask for things, maybe look in their archives, and etc., etc. This is something you are unlikely to do in most cases, but keep in mind that it is a possibility. And if you are going to use this kind of sources, please make sure that you comply with research ethics and get all clearances and consents from people you are going to collect data from. So, there's this concept of bibliographical trails that is very useful to know if you are a beginner researcher. So, the idea is really, if you find a useful source, right, which is super relevant to your topic and hypothesis, then check the sources that this source, uses, right? Often, you could find them in the bibliography of that source, in the references list, or sometimes even authors recommend some things, right? They say in this paper we do this, but if you are interested in another thing, then please look at these published papers, and they list them. Okay, so also another good advice is really read the literature review in those relevant articles and check what they cite. Okay, so by doing that, you are kind of following the trail that other researchers already walked, and they pre-selected useful stuff for you. Okay, and from all those things that they recommend, cite, and review, go ahead and find what's relevant for your research. And the last thing we'll talk in this video about is what you're gonna do, really what to do with what you find, right? So if you found relevant sources, right, then you are very lucky. Go ahead and begin your literature review and start your writing. Um, and sometimes among those relevant sources, you might find, articles and books that have already done what you are planning to do. Okay, this happens, and if this happens to you, don't panic. What you can do is first read that article or book very, very carefully. Okay, analyze it. Check if the book or article actually settles your question. Does it really provide good answers to your research question? And if no, then clearly go ahead and do conduct your research. Do study that research question again. I mean, not again, but on your own, right? If the source actually provides good answers to your question, then really my advice would be to go ahead and formulate a new question. Yes, even this way, even in this case, look at the positive side. Before doing all that data collection, analysis, and write up, you actually found that you don't need to do your research, right? And that you need to do something else. So that happens. Just accept that. So that is also why we do a literature review, okay? To find out, to make sure that nobody else has done what we're planning to do already. If even and sometimes a source settles your question, provides answers to your question, but you could still check if they did it well, and when reading the paper or book, maybe you should analyze whether maybe you can do it better. Maybe despite the fact that there is this published paper on your question, providing answers to your question, you can find the limitations or maybe even mistakes in how they found those answers or how they analyzed their data, and maybe you can still conduct the research that you originally intended to do, but do it better. Okay, and so really all this brings us to this last tips is like always keep your research questions in mind, right? When doing your literature review, that is something you should always do, and read with an open mind, be critical, evaluate what you read. It's a good idea even to discuss those things that you find and read with maybe with your peers, with other students, and with your professors. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. See you later.